Lohfink did a nice job making his point in the last section that being part of the people of God wasn't about being part of the physical genealogy of Abraham. Right? He said that that's the way the Bible talks about everyone being the descendants of Abraham and God's promise to the descendant of Abraham is a way to emphasize the constancy of God's action. Right? The fidelity of God to His promise, not the purity of blood or race. Right? It's not about the bloodline. It's not about the ethnicity. It's about being the people who trust in God. So after we went through the formation of the people of Israel and the Abraham story, the foundational or the key story for the Israelite people, it isn't revolve around Abraham. It revolves around God freeing them from slavery in Egypt. The Exodus, right? Exodus is the exit of the Israelites from Egypt, right? And it's an experience that is based on, or could be based on, seems like it's based on a real life experience of some slaves who escaped slavery under the Egyptian Pharaoh around 1250 BC. We call it the Moses group, right? They're the ones that bring the story about Moses. So, they bring that story up into Israel, where they meet up with the other runaway slaves and pioneer peasants, right, who had abandoned the Egyptian city-states in Canaan, or city-states run by other like-minded societies. And they hear in that, the reflection of their own story. You escaped from slavery in a system where the king was considered a god, and that's the way things were. That you were supposed to be a slave. You escaped from a society where the king could just force people into labor. Yep. Now, at some point, this remembrance and this celebration was combined with the festival that we call the Passover. Right, and it's a festival in which they would slaughter a lamb, and they would eat lamb. Right, it's probably an older festival, but now it's going to be given a new meaning for the new people of God, and it's going to be combined with the story of how God freed their ancestors from slavery in Egypt. Right, and if you go to a Passover meal still today, the youngest child in the room, I guess it's the youngest child that can talk, is assigned to ask this question: why is this night different from all other nights? And at that point, the story is recited from the Torah. And here it is. They remember their humble beginnings. They remember that God saved them. They remember who they are. Right? Not just the people who God saved, but they're going to be the saving people. So this passage is often linked to passages that say, so when you encounter the widow, the orphan, the stranger, right, the oppressed person in your country, right, remember that God took care of us when we were the widow, the orphan, the stranger in Egypt. Again, it's not about being special. It's about being called to serve. You're being called to be God in the world. This is what it means to be the people of God. So the stories are admitted as expanded and stylized as Lohfink puts it. The story of the way that God freed slavery in Egypt is a succession of miracles for the Israelites, right? For the Egyptians, they're not so great, right? But it culminates in the parting of the Red Sea, right? Another miraculous event. They pass through it. And then God unparts the Red Sea and it collapses on the Egyptians. And the Egyptian army is defeated. And the Israelites move on to freedom. These stories, right? They're the story of the Moses group who escaped from slavery in Egypt, but they're also stories of the other slaves, right? They said, that's our story too. We escaped, right? We were delivered from oppression in the Canaanite cities. And later it's going to be used as a way for the prophets to say to the kings, hey, hello, you're the new Pharaoh, buddy. What are you doing? You're doing exactly the thing that God took us away from when he made us his people. Now let's go back to this Moses group. They were living in Egypt, a closed social system, right? And the Pharaoh was the epitome of it, right? Everything was wrapped up in him. He was considered divine, right? He was a living sun god. And everything came from him. Life was from the Pharaoh. When the Pharaoh died, people bugged out. They said, oh my gosh, no, we don't have a Pharaoh. We don't have a connection to the vine. Is the waters of the Nile going to continue to sustain us? They had regular famines. They were used to, the water drying up every now and then. They were used to everything all of a sudden being taken away, and all of a sudden Egypt is like the desert that surrounds it. They needed that. They thought that their whole sustenance, their whole life, being able to live, was based on, in their minds, the Pharaoh. Right? To rebel against the Pharaoh, that would be like rebelling against life almost. Right? Like, why would you? The Pharaoh is the one who gives us all this food. The Pharaoh is the way we live. It was a complete, salvation came from the state. It was a completely state-dominated system. The Pharaoh was the connection to the divine, the source of life. Everybody worked for him. And he could just tell you to go to work. He could do these forced labor on people, not just the slaves, not just the Israelites, but anybody in Egypt. But people did it because they thought that was it. Like, hey, if we don't have Pharaoh, we die. Right? What are we going to do? Go out and live in the desert? You'll hear that in Exodus. The Israelites will say, well, gosh, what do we do down here in the desert? Didn't we think about it? There's no food out here in the desert. That's why everybody lives in Egypt. There's no water out here in the desert. Yeah, it was horrible to be a slave in Egypt, but you know what they had that we don't have out here in the desert? Water. Right? And they'll say, did you think of that, Moses? But I'm getting ahead of myself here. But we'll look at that later. Just to know, people thought Pharaoh was it. So even the idea to leave, that there was some other way, this did probably occur to most people during the height of the Egyptian state. Right, but Moses and his group did flee the system. They did get out. And the groups that were doing the same thing in Canaan, right, fleeing similar systems. And when they met up, they said, your story is our story too. Or yes, we reckon, yes, exactly. That's what happened to us too. We were these people. They told us, the gods were oppressing us. They were oppressing us, and we said no. We left. We got out. We escaped. By some grace, by some inspiration, we were able to move out of there. We were able to revolt or just abandon that place. And so the story of Moses, right, and their people who came from Egypt, that became everybody's story. Because they all had, it was the same story, right? Details a little different. But they were all easy to adopt it, right? Is this reminding you of Ratzinger? Right? Remember Ratzinger way back at the beginning of this course? Right? How do we know things? Most areas of life, we know things because we trust the experts and the other people who trust the experts, and then we have our own personal experience, and they fit together, and we're like, yes, that makes sense. That's exactly what happened here. These people had their own experience of escaping an oppressive state that used religiosity to enforce oppression of the people. And that's what the Moses story is all about. So, yes, they heard it. Yes, it was true. And they knew it was true because it fit their own experience. Just like you and your cell phones. Now, when Israel, 250 years later, they had their own kings, they start doing the same thing, right? And the prophets come and tell the kings, whoa, 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 hey, remember the Exodus? Like, that's you now, right? So they became a way to critique their own state, which is in the process of betraying all these values that had come from the Exodus event, right? Freedom, equality, fraternity. Those were not made up during the Enlightenment period. Those come from the Exodus. Those come from Israel, right? The assumption of a quasi-divine rule, saying that the king speaks God's will. The Israelite king started doing that, and the prophets came and called on it. Now let's look at how the Israelites were freed from oppression in Egypt. It wasn't through a passive resistance within the system, right? That's what the midwives tried first. When the Egyptians first started oppressing the Israelites in the form of a genocide, when they're like, we can't have any more of these Israelites. The first thing they do is they just tell the midwives to kill them. But the midwives say, oh, we didn't get there in time. The babies are born already. We show up, they're already born. Right? And then Moses tries something else. Moses kills when he sees an Egyptian slave master abusing an Israelite. He kills the Egyptian slave master. That doesn't work either. Right? Counter violence within the system. Just oppressing the oppressor. That doesn't work. The Israelites don't follow Moses at that point. He runs away. He has to run away. He runs out into the desert in Midian. That's where he learned about God. The third way that they dealt with the oppression in Egypt was this kind of free space idea within the system. When Moses first comes back to tell Pharaoh to set the Israelites free, he doesn't say we're going to run away. He doesn't say, hey, we're leaving now. At first he says, we just want to go out in the desert to celebrate this festival. We'll be back. They weren't coming back, but that's what he was telling. And Lohfink says that this represents the most tempting way to be the people of God that doesn't actually work. And that's just kind of like you have some free space that you remind yourself of your identity, but you don't live the life. You just live the life of Babylon, right? You just live the life of Egypt. You just live the life of not trusting other people. You live the life of seeing others as your competitor, right? And not your beloved, right? And it's very tempting, he says, because you can kind of be the people of God, but not really, right? You can kind of remember who you are, but you don't have to live it out. And we see this in the story of the Exodus, because in Egypt they had food, and they were kind of like, they said, remember our flesh pots? They had meat to eat there, right? When they get on the desert, sometimes there's no food. So this is it. He says tempting, and he suggests this is kind of what's going on in Europe. This would be like us if we we go to mass, but we don't really gather, right? You go to mass. Sometimes people don't even want to give the exchange of peace. You're there. They don't really want to talk to you or anything. And sometimes maybe that's us, right? Sometimes maybe that's you. You go in, you do your thing. Yeah, I'm Catholic. I'm out, right? But if it doesn't change your heart, right? If you don't start to live like you are actually the body of Christ, if you don't start treating the other people like they're parts of the same body as you are, and therefore you're going to take care of them, because it's, in effect, taking care of yourself, right? Then it's just this free space thing, but it's not effective. It's an ineffective ritual because you're not participating in it. Not with your heart, right? That's why you got to go to coffee and donuts, right? Coffee and donuts. What happens? You actually meet people. You might share a donut, right? You start to talk to other people who are like you. You start to talk to other people who aren't like you, right? And you can really start to have a community, right? Where people are seeing each other as real people, not just other people in the line for the drive-through mat, right? See what he's getting at there? So how did God free the Israelites from the Pharaoh? It was nothing within the system, right? There was no, hey, we're going to make changes to the system. They're out of the system. They're a whole new life. They're going to a new land, which shows a new pattern of society, right? You don't really need to go to a new geographical place, but you do need to live a new kind of life. It's a new social project, right? And you see it revealed when the people are gathered at the foot of the mountain of God. And Egypt is done. Now they're going to get a new social order, a new way of life through the Torah. And it comes straight from God. The whole thing, the whole Exodus story, right, is something so astonishing, right? You go from the totalitarian, oppressive state system, which is involved in every area of your life, dominates everything, even your basic rights of reproduction and family life. It's all, the Pharaoh's even trying to take that away, right? Into what? A society of equality, fraternity, right? Sorority, an equality of trust in other human beings, in their full and dignity and equality. It's a miracle, right? It's something that's accomplished by God alone. And that's what's going on when we baptize, right? When we are baptized in Christ, we die to sin and we're reborn in Christ, right? The person who's baptized is snatched out of the old society and rescued, right, for the possibility of life in a new society, in the New Jerusalem, the eschatological people of God, right? And Lohfink gives us a nice summary of what that's all about. Right? Where genuine love, which comes only from God, begins. The one who loves abandons the self. He or she loves above all things. Goes outside the self and turns to God and neighbor. Right? Again, now the authentic religion, the revelation is not about, hey, I'm going to impose my will on other people. Hey, I'm going to use this social structure to get people to build pyramids that are going to honor me. It's not going to be used to convince people that they should be my slave labor. I'm not going to use it to say, hey, certain people shouldn't be living here in my space. No, I turn outside of self and look to others. Right? Like God, I cause my love to shine on the just and the unjust alike. That's how we know that people are the people of God. That they love one another like God loved us.